It started with a whisper. Just a whisper slipping through the dark like breath on glass. He thought I was asleep. He thought I was safe. I wasn't. And neither was the truth. They say marriage is built on trust, but what if it's built on omission? What if every kiss hides a silence and every silence covers a grave? I married a man who brought me wine, warmth, and safety. But at night he brought someone else a secret. A secret with a pulse. A secret named Emily. The woman he buried in paperwork, not soil. The woman I was never supposed to find. I used to wonder what love could survive betrayal. Now I wonder what version of me survived him. My name is Evelyn Moore. And this is what it costs to stay alive in a life someone else designed to erase you. The house was quiet like it always was after 10. Lucas had already gone upstairs an hour earlier claiming he was exhausted from court. I stayed back finishing an email to a client, sipping my glass of Syrah in slow practiced sips. It was late spring in Cherry Creek, the air cool but not cold, and the windows were cracked just enough to let in the faint sound of wind brushing through the trees. Everything felt calm, still, almost staged. Our house was one of those polished kinds. White stone exterior, black trim, 2 stories, every detail chosen by a professional interior designer who Lucas said had a better sense of balance than I did. He wasn't wrong. I had good taste, but I didn't care enough to argue. That was our dynamic. I handled people, he handled presentation. I walked up the stairs barefoot, the wood cool beneath my skin. At the top I paused listening. The master bedroom door was cracked open slightly. I saw the light from his phone before I heard his voice. It was low, careful, intimate. I didn't move, just stood there back against the wall, the hallway bathed in silver from the moonlight leaking through the window. His voice was just above a whisper, which was unusual. Lucas didn't whisper. He didn't bother to lower his voice when taking calls at home. But tonight he did. No, she doesn't suspect anything yet. I felt my body stiffen. That sentence hung in the air, like smoke. I didn't hear the response, just the faint rhythmic murmur of another voice on the line, too soft to make out. Lucas sounded calm. Rehearsed. Like he was the one keeping someone else steady. I backed away, slow and quiet, the same way a person retreats from a cliff edge once they realize the ground beneath them might be unstable. I slid into bed before he came in, pulled the comforter up to my collarbone, turned toward the window. I kept my breathing steady, my eyes closed just enough to look real. The door creaked softly, then footsteps and the familiar dip of the mattress as he climbed in beside me. I counted to 10. His body settled. Then came the exhale. Long, deliberate, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. "Where were you?" My voice came out hushed, feigned grogginess wrapping around the syllables. "Bathroom," he said, quick, smooth. And the call, he didn't flinch. "Just a client. Late filings. Real estate dispute. You know how messy those get." I turned slightly, opened my eyes just a bit. He was lying on his back, one hand behind his headphone screen, face down on the nightstand. That was new. Lucas never hid his screen. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe it really was work. But that sentence. "She doesn't suspect anything yet." I rolled over, buried my face in the pillow, and told myself to wait. Not tonight, not now. In the morning, Lucas was already up and dressed by the time I walked into the kitchen. He stood by the sink scrolling through his phone, coffee steaming in his other hand. He looked like the picture of calm efficiency. "Morning," he said, not looking up. "Morning." I walked to the fridge, pulled out creamer, poured myself a cup, then sat at the island. He moved like he always did. Fluid. Charming. In control. But something had shifted. Not in him. In me. Last night had planted something. A splinter. He kissed my temple on his way to grab his briefcase. "Big day?" I asked. "Same as always. Mediation at 9, conference call at 11, then I'm probably going to be late tonight. Depositions in Boulder." "Right." He turned, smiled, and something about it felt too perfect. Too symmetrical. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah, just didn't sleep well." He nodded, walked toward the door, then paused like he remembered something. "Oh, I might need some of your account info soon." thinking of consolidating everything into one folder just in case. Emergency prep, you know. His tone was casual. Sure, I said, matching his tone. The door clicked behind him and I stared at my untouched coffee. Lucas had never cared about my accounts. Never once asked for details. We had a joint for the mortgage and utilities, and beyond that we'd always kept things separate. That was our agreement. But now he wanted to keep things tidy. Just in case. I took a long sip and felt my stomach turn. That evening, I stayed later at work than usual. My office at Sterling Wealth Advisors was quiet after 6. I turned off my monitor, grabbed my purse, then hesitated. I opened my laptop again, logged into our shared bank account, and clicked through the recent activity. Nothing huge, nothing bold. Just quiet withdrawals. Small amounts, recurring. One to a consulting firm I'd never heard of. Another to a private health entity. And one labeled BSW Holdings. I stared at it. BSW. Bellevue Secure Ward. I didn't recognize it at first, but the initials stuck. I closed my laptop, shoved it in my bag, and walked out into the parking garage. The sun had dipped below the skyline, casting the glass buildings of downtown Denver in shades of orange and blue. I drove home with the windows down and the music off. Lucas wasn't home yet. I sat on the edge of the bed scrolling through the charges again on my phone, noting the names, the patterns. Trying to find meaning in the math. My eyes burned. My throat felt tight. I knew numbers. I trusted numbers. But tonight none of them added up. I sat on the edge of the bed long after the numbers stopped scrolling across the screen. The blue glow of my phone cast faint shadows across the white comforter, painting everything in a strange, sterile light. Somewhere downstairs, the HVAC system clicked on with a low hum. I didn't move. I just stared at the screen until my eyes blurred and my thumb went numb. The pattern wasn't random. Weekly transfers, each under $1,000, all to the same entity. BSW Holdings. Some labeled as consulting fees, others as wellness services. And yet I'd never seen the name in any of our financial discussions. Lucas prided himself on transparency. That was one of his marriage pitches. No secrets. We were a team. That pitch sounded cheap now. I finally forced myself to power down the screen and slid the phone under my pillow like a child hiding contraband. Then I lay back and stared at the ceiling. For a moment, I could hear Lucas's voice again, low and intimate from the night before. She doesn't suspect anything yet. He hadn't said my name, but it didn't matter. It was the tone that haunted me. That steady, quiet confidence. The next few nights were variations of the same. Lucas would head to bed before me, leave the bedroom around 1 a.m., whisper into his phone somewhere in the house. Sometimes in his office, sometimes in the guest bathroom with the fan running. He thought I was asleep. I let him believe it. I stayed perfectly still each time, eyes closed, breathing even. My heartbeat, however, betrayed me, punching like a warning drum against my ribs. By the third night, I started recording the time. 1:12 a.m. Then 1:258. Then 1:37. He always returned to bed with the same cadence, quiet footsteps. The gentle pull of the blanket. The long, measured exhale. Once I whispered his name as he climbed back in, he froze for just half a second. What are you doing awake? Couldn't sleep. He kissed my shoulder. Bad dreams. Something like that. He stayed silent, his breath warm against my skin, then eventually drifted off. I didn't. The next morning I waited until he left for the gym before opening my laptop again. I logged into our main checking account and dug deeper. Every transaction from the past 90 days. I organized them by vendor. The usual suspects appeared first. Mortgage, groceries, utilities. My Amazon habit. A few dinners at Il Posto. But then there it was again. BSW Holdings. Always scheduled just before midnight on Sundays. Always the same vague descriptors. One entry caught my eye. A transfer of $940 labeled as transport and support. I clicked the transaction ID, opened the receipt. It was billed from a location on the outskirts of Fort Collins. Some kind of private transport service. I copied the address into Google Maps. It showed up as a long, unmarked building behind a gated lot flanked by woods. No business name, just coordinates. My chest tightened. I spent the rest of the day barely functioning. I smiled at clients, gave polished updates on their portfolios, nodded through staff meetings. But in between, I checked his calendar. Nothing on Sunday nights. Nothing that could explain those transfers. When I got home, Lucas was in the backyard trimming hedges. He waved as I pulled into the driveway. His sleeves were rolled up, forearms streaked with dirt, hair a mess from the wind. He looked normal, domestic, like someone who remembered garbage pickup and took vitamins daily. I walked up, forced a smile. "You're really leaning into suburbia." He grinned. "Trying to get ahead of the HOA. Apparently someone filed a complaint about overgrown shrubs." "God forbid," I said and kissed his cheek. We had grilled chicken for dinner. He opened a bottle of red, made jokes about his upcoming deposition, asked about my clients. I played my part. After we cleaned up, I sat on the couch with a book I didn't read while he reviewed documents on his tablet. The television buzzed in the background with muted sports commentary. It was so ordinary it made my skin itch. Eventually he stood and stretched. "I'm going to bed early. I've got that thing at 7. Right. I'll finish this chapter and be up in a bit. Night, Ev." "Night." I waited. The clock inched past midnight. I made tea I didn't drink. Stared out the window at the dark shapes of trees in the yard. At 1:06 I heard the floor creak above me. Then footsteps. A door opening. I walked to the base of the stairs, barefoot, holding my breath. I knew where he was going before he even closed the bathroom door. I crept halfway up the stairs and stopped. His voice came through the gap, muffled but still audible. "Yes, weekly is fine. Just make sure she's medicated this time. No slip-ups." I felt the tea slosh in my cup. My hand was shaking. I backed down the stairs, moving fast and quiet, heart racing. I set the mug on the counter and leaned against the fridge. "She's medicated this time." Who? I knew the answer before the question fully formed. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed next to the man I married, trying to measure the weight of the unknown. Trying to remember if I'd ever really known him at all. I opened the laptop the next morning before the sun had finished rising. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood. Lucas had left early, something about a mediation in Arvada. I didn't say much when he kissed my temple on the way out, just smiled, nodded, kept the mask smooth. The screen glowed to life and I went straight back to the transaction history. BSW Holdings. The payment ID from 3 days ago included a reference number that hadn't meant anything to me at first. But now it scratched at the edge of recognition. Case EM 1037. I copied it into a search engine. Nothing came up on public databases. No linked corporations, no licensed entities in Colorado. The only thing remotely related was an internal billing code format used by certain healthcare institutions, particularly psychiatric ones. I kept digging. The third search result down led me to an outdated PDF from the Bellevue Secure Ward System Guidelines. A line in the document matched the format. Patient ID protocols begin with initials followed by a numeric sequence. Bellevue Secure Ward. It was a private, high-security psychiatric facility northwest of Fort Collins. The kind of place that didn't advertise, didn't publish, didn't explain. I stared at the name for a long time. The ache in my stomach had evolved into something sharper now, like glass turning under my ribs. I needed help. At 9:14 a.m., I texted Julia Harper, one of the analysts I trusted at Sterling Wealth. Julia had worked with me for 4 years. Smart, no bullshit, and discreet. She once helped me dig up hidden assets for a client's divorce without blinking. If anyone could crack this without tipping alarms, it was her. "You free for a side project today?" "Always." "You okay? Just curious." "We'll explain in person." "Can we meet after lunch?" She sent me a thumbs up and a coffee emoji. By the time we sat down in the back corner of the Wooden Spoon Cafe, I had compiled everything. Transfer records. Case ID. Basic info on Bellevue. Julia took one look at the file and whistled under her breath. This isn't your typical offshore account runaround. You sure about diving into something this deep? I nodded. I didn't want to explain everything in the middle of a brunch spot, but my hands were shaking slightly as I passed her the notes. She frowned, scanning the page. BSW Holdings is a shell. No real office, no employees listed. But look at this. Their billing code prefix matches several known invoices issued by Bellevue Secure. I've seen these before in fraud investigations. You think it's tied to a patient? Likely. KCM 1037. The EM stands for the patient's initials. She paused. And the last name Moore would give us a match, wouldn't it? My throat dried. Try Emily Moore. That's Lucas's ex-wife. She went missing 8 years ago. No body, no charges, no answers. Julia blinked. Jesus, Evelyn, I know. She typed faster now, fingers flying over her keyboard as she bounced between encrypted databases and hospital administrative records. 10 minutes passed in silence, broken only by the clink of spoons and the low murmur of conversations around us. Then she stopped. Okay, I found something. Internal system, not supposed to be public. I cross-referenced the patient ID with historical case logs and got a partial hit. She turned the screen toward me. KCM 1037. Admitted under provisional guardianship in 2017. No discharge. No family contact. Authorized visitor Elmore. I stared at it. Lucas. It felt like my body had gone cold from the inside. My fingers tingled. He lied. He told me Emily had vanished. That her car was found at the overlook by Red Rock Canyon and that they ruled it accidental. He said it broke him for years. He said he was finally healing, but she wasn't dead. She was locked away. Quietly, legally, hidden. He had kept her there for 8 years. Funded it, visited occasionally, and made sure no one knew. Not the public. Not me. Julia touched my hand gently. You want me to keep looking? Number, not now. You okay? I stood up too fast and had to steady myself on the back of the chair. I just need air. Outside the afternoon had warmed, but I couldn't feel it. I walked 2 blocks before I stopped, leaning against a brick storefront, breath shallow. My hands felt numb. Emily Moore was alive. That name echoed in my chest, knocking against every memory I had of Lucas, telling me his past was clean. That he wanted honesty. That he had nothing left to hide. I thought of the phone calls, the money, the coded words. Make sure she's medicated. He hadn't been talking about me. Not yet. I waited 2 days before making the call. Enough time to mask urgency as curiosity. I told Lucas I was thinking of expanding my client base into healthcare professionals and wanted insight into liability and guardianship laws. He nodded, uninterested, more focused on some pending motion he was reviewing at the kitchen table. I slipped the name Dr. Marla Hale into the conversation as casually as I could, said I'd read a law journal where she'd been quoted about long-term psychiatric care. He didn't react. Just flipped the page and mumbled something about precedent. I booked the consultation through a legal platform under my maiden name. 30-minute Zoom call listed as a research interview for a finance blog. I created a fake LinkedIn profile, added enough credentials to look legitimate. When the appointment confirmed, I stared at the screen for a long time, heart pounding. The call was scheduled for 11:00 a.m. I locked my office door and lowered the blinds before clicking join meeting. She appeared a few seconds later, middle-aged, professional, hair pulled back in a tight bun, the kind of person who wore efficiency like a uniform. Dr. Hale, thank you for taking the time. I appreciate it. Of course. What specifically are you researching? I launched into my pitch, careful to sound generic. Interest in how guardianship is handled for psychiatric patients, especially in long-term care. She answered in rehearsed phrases, citing statutes, general policies. She didn't mention names. I didn't push. Not yet. Then I asked about oversight. How often are guardians required to visit? That varies. Some are involved weekly. Others delegate decisions but maintain legal responsibility. And what about confidentiality? If someone is under guardianship but the relationship isn't disclosed, how does that work? Her eyes flicked for a second. Then she said, well, the guardian has legal rights regardless of familial ties. It's not uncommon for patients to be under care of someone who isn't technically next of kin, especially in cases involving complex legal histories. I smiled politely. Is there any scenario where the patient's prior relationships would be intentionally concealed, only if it's in the patient's best interest? Or if the guardian deems it necessary for privacy, particularly in high-profile or sensitive cases? She didn't say Lucas's name, but she didn't have to. When the call ended, I sat there in silence. My reflection in the black screen looked pale and unfamiliar. I closed the laptop, shoved it into my drawer, and checked the time. Lucas wouldn't be home until after 7. I had 3 hours. I drove back to the house on autopilot, barely remembering the turns. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed in the garage code. I entered through the side door and walked straight to his study. Lucas kept it meticulously clean. Dark walnut desk, leather chair, 2 locked file cabinets. I ignored the obvious. Instead, I opened the lower drawer of the bookcase, the one he never used when I was around. It was filled with legal pads, old tax forms, and a thin folder marked private. My hands hesitated. Inside were 3 documents. One was a guardianship agreement with redacted patient name signed under initials LM. The second was a letter from Bellevue Secure confirming payment schedules. The third stopped my breath. Emily Marie Moore. Date of birth the 12th of October 1983. The form listed Lucas as her legal guardian. It also included emergency instructions, medications, visitation log. The latest entry was dated 6 weeks ago. Handwritten notes. Patient continues to exhibit signs of delusional paranoia. Requesting continued dosage increase. I snapped photos of every page with my phone, heart hammering. The thought of Lucas's handwriting on that form made my stomach twist. His pen strokes were neat, measured like he'd taken his time with each word. I put everything back exactly as it was. Not too tidy. Not messy, just untouched. By the time I got to the garage, my legs were shaking. I climbed into my car and closed the door, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. My phone buzzed. A text from Julia. Just checking in. You good? I opened my camera roll. The image of Emily's file stared back at me. Her name, her birthday, her diagnosis, her prison. I hit forward and hovered over Julia's contact. But my thumb didn't move. For the first time since this began, I felt real fear. Not anxiety. Not suspicion. Fear. The kind that crawled under your skin and whispered that you were already too deep. I sat there in the silence of the garage engine off, phone in my lap, and watched the light on the ceiling shift as the sun dipped behind the neighbor's roofline. By the time I walked back into the house, Lucas was already home. The smell of garlic and rosemary filled the kitchen, and I could hear jazz playing low from the Sonos speaker on the counter. He stood over the stove, stirring a pot of something creamy and rich, like he hadn't just spent the past 8 years hiding a woman in a facility tucked behind a forest. Hey, you're just in time. He smiled, wiping his hands on a dish towel. I made risotto. Thought we could use a little comfort food. I kissed his cheek and forced my voice to stay even. Looks amazing. What's the occasion? He shrugged, plating 2 bowls. Just wanted to surprise you. We haven't had a real night together in weeks. Figured I'd earn some husband points. He set the dishes down and poured wine without asking. I let the glass sit untouched while I pushed risotto around my plate. He was charming, relaxed. Focused on me like he was trying to rebuild a bridge. Halfway through dinner, he reached into the drawer beside him and slid a slim folder across the table. His tone stayed casual. I've been meaning to bring this up. It's nothing urgent, but I think we should go ahead and consolidate everything. Just in case something ever happens. I opened the folder slowly. The title read Marital Asset Consolidation and Durable Power of Attorney. Beneath that, my full name. My social security number. Pre-filled spaces for my signature. My pulse quickened, but I didn't let it show. I looked up and tilted my head. You think something's going to happen, number? Not at all. But after everything with the market last year, I just want to be prepared. You know how it is. God forbid one of us ends up in the hospital. This just gives me the ability to manage things without a court delay. It's a smart move, really. I nodded slowly. I mean, I get it. I thought we were fine keeping things separate. We are. This doesn't change that. It just makes it easier if something temporary comes up. It's about protecting each other. He leaned across the table, touched my hand. His thumb traced slow circles against my knuckles. You trust me, right? I held his gaze. Of course I do. He smiled, the kind of smile that used to make me feel safe. Now it made my skin crawl. No rush. Just think about it. The next few days he softened his approach. Brought home flowers. Took the trash out without asking. Rubbed my shoulders while I worked. The way someone prepares a surface before cutting into it. All gentle, all planned. On Thursday night, I walked into the living room to grab my charger and noticed his phone buzzing on the coffee table. He was upstairs shaving. The screen lit up with a preview of a text. Dr. Marla Hale, ensure she remains unaware. Do not repeat the mistake with Emily. I froze. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't need to. The words were etched into my mind like they'd been carved there. My hands trembled as I backed out of the room, careful not to make a sound. He was preparing me. Like a transaction. A liability to manage. Another woman to silence when she started asking the wrong questions. I stayed awake that night long after he fell asleep. Staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between breaths. Thinking of Emily, thinking of what mistake meant, what it had cost her. Friday morning he handed me the folder again over coffee. I'd appreciate it if you sign this today. I have a notary coming to the office this afternoon, and I'd like to file it before the weekend. Just makes things cleaner. I gave him a small smile. Sure. I'll stop by FedEx and get it scanned while I'm out. He kissed my forehead and left, with a satisfied nod, the way someone does when the plan is moving exactly on schedule. I waited 20 minutes, then slipped the document into my bag, drove to the UPS store on Lincoln Avenue, and walked past the front counter to the self-service copier. I scanned every page twice, uploaded a digital copy to my cloud. Then again to a private drive Julia had set up for me just in case. Printed a backup and stored it under the false bottom of the glove box. I stepped out into the parking lot, the wind sharp against my cheeks. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Lucas thought he'd moved first, but I'd seen his play. Now it was my turn. I didn't just play along. I leaned in. Lucas wanted docility, so I gave him warmth. Soft smiles over morning coffee, nods of agreement during dinner conversations, light brushes of affection on the arm, as if I had no questions, no doubts. I even complimented his tie choices. Said the red made him look assertive. He started leaving documents out in the open, letting conversations drift closer to money, to future plans, to trusts and contingencies. I responded with vague enthusiasm. That sounds smart. You're always ahead of the curve. I asked him about his day. I kissed him goodbye with both hands on his face. The harder I leaned into the lie, the more comfortable he became. Like he was rehearsing for a role he'd already played once and perfected, a man with nothing to hide. I booked a weekend trip to Taos, sent him the link, and said I needed a getaway, maybe some gallery time. Just me. He offered to come, but I insisted it would be a solo recharge. He acted like he understood, but his eyes flicked to the side the way they always did when he was calculating. We both smiled. That night, I drafted an email to a woman I hadn't spoken to in 6 years. Special Agent Marissa Deakins. We met during a financial compliance audit back in New York when I was working at Hanover. She'd gone federal after that last I heard. I kept the message brief and clear. Just enough to trigger attention without flagging Lucas. I've come across documents involving unlawful patient confinement and financial misrepresentation. I believe they involve my husband. I have supporting evidence and am willing to meet off record. Attached the guardianship contract, financial transfers, patient logs, the transcript from my call with Dr. Hale. I hit send from a new Proton Mail account routed through a VPN, timed on a lunch break from a coffee shop 2 zip codes over. Then I called Shannon Avery, a private estate lawyer in Boulder. I asked about independent trust formation. Quiet. Separate from marital assets. She knew the tone, made no judgments. Said we could meet in person by Thursday. Every move had to feel natural. Measured, preemptive. At home, I let Lucas walk in on me researching travel insurance. I started leaving wellness books on the nightstand. I even downloaded a meditation app and played it at low volume while we fell asleep. Calm Evelyn. The trusting wife. The ideal candidate. Thursday afternoon, I met Shannon in a quiet corner office near Pearl Street. We created a revocable trust under my maiden name and moved 3 accounts. One personal, one inherited from my mother, one joint with recent transfers. Lucas would notice eventually, but not yet. I drove back home under steady rain. My hands clenched the steering wheel tighter than necessary. It felt like swimming underwater with bricks in both fists. That evening, Lucas texted that he had drinks with a client and would be late. I took the chance. His office smelled like cedar and old paper. The desk was cleared, but his laptop sat open, the screen dimmed. I dropped a USB into the side port, downloaded a copy of recent emails and documents. Then I opened a browser tab to check the backups from the scanner. I transferred the new guardianship draft and confirmation forms to my cloud. Footsteps. The front door opened. Too early. I slammed the laptop shut without logging off. Hard in my throat, I yanked the USB free, shoved it into my sleeve, and walked calmly toward the door. He stepped in holding a brown paper bag and an umbrella. Rain glistened on his coat. He stopped when he saw me. Eyes narrowed just slightly. "Hey. Thought you had a client dinner." He smiled too slowly. "Cancelled." She rescheduled. Got caught up with her kids. I nodded, pretending to adjust my scarf. Just getting a file for a client. I forgot to email it earlier. He glanced toward the office, then back at me. "Your laptop's still on." I smiled. "I know. I'll shut it down now. Was just wrapping up." He held my gaze a beat longer than usual. Then stepped aside. "Need help with anything?" "No, I'm good." I walked past him, my heart thudding so loud I thought he might hear it. Upstairs, I locked the bathroom door, pulled the USB from my sleeve, and buried it inside the lining of my makeup bag. I stared at myself in the mirror. My reflection looked calm, collected. But my palms were sweating. That was too close. I woke before dawn the next morning, barely rested, my body running on nothing but fear and adrenaline. The GPS said it would take 92 minutes to reach Bellevue secure from our house in Cherry Creek. I left before Lucas finished his shower. I'd scheduled the visit under the guise of a family well-being audit. Used Julia's work number, routed the call back through a burner line. When Bellevue confirmed, I told them I was a distant cousin requesting a wellness check. No one questioned me. Guardianship meant control, but sometimes all it took was a polite voice and a confident tone. The road to Fort Collins was silent and gray rain still fresh on the asphalt. I drove with both hands gripping the wheel, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few minutes. The recorder was tucked deep in the inner pocket of my coat, disguised as a pen. The facility sat behind a wire fence, half shielded by tall pines and thick fog. From the outside, it looked more like a research center than a psychiatric ward. Cold concrete. Tinted windows. A single camera pivoting slowly above the entrance. I signed in under the alias Evelyn Browning. The receptionist barely glanced up as she handed me a visitor's badge and buzzed the door. My footsteps echoed through the corridor, the sterile lighting buzzing faintly overhead. They led me to a viewing room with a partitioned glass window. On the other side sat a woman with hollow cheeks and brittle wrists. She wore gray institutional cotton and a blank expression. Her hair, once auburn in old photos I found online, had dulled into a faded straw color, but her eyes were sharp. Watching. Alive. Emily Moore. I sat down slowly. She didn't move at first. Then, as if something clicked, her eyes locked on mine. "You're not a cousin," she said, her voice barely audible through the thick glass. "Number." She leaned closer, her palms flat on the table. "He's doing it again, isn't he?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Her lips curled into something that looked more like grief than a smile. He told me you died. I said quietly. He told me a lot of things, she replied. I glanced at the nurse standing in the corner of the room, arms crossed. She was watching us, but not listening. The room was soundproofed, monitored by camera, but not audio. I tapped my coat pocket once, then shifted closer. Why are you here? I needed to see if it was true. That you were real. That he kept you here. Emily laughed under her breath. Her hands trembled. He said I was unstable, that I needed rest. After what I saw. What did you see? She glanced at the nurse again, then back at me. There was a man. Lucas represented a company buying out a piece of land in Larimer County. The seller resisted. He didn't want to move. One night there was an accident. The man fell. Down a ravine near the property line. Her voice cracked, eyes glassy. Lucas didn't call the police. He cleaned it up. Paid off the deputy. And when I started asking questions, he said I was spiraling, that I needed help. The next thing I remember, I woke up here, sedated. Under his signature. I swallowed hard, my throat burning. Why didn't you try to escape, contact someone? They don't let you. For years, I wasn't even allowed visitors. Every letter I wrote was lost. Every time I asked for a phone, they changed my meds. She looked at me like she wanted to scream but couldn't. He's too careful. He makes you doubt yourself until you believe what he says. Until the truth sounds like delusion. My fingers curled into fists beneath the table. I won't let him do it again. Emily leaned in closer, her voice low and broken. He thinks you're weaker than me. But you're not. The nurse tapped her watch and opened the door. Time's up. I stood, eyes still locked with Emily's. I'll come back. She nodded once. Then turned away as the nurse guided her out. I walked through the exit corridor without speaking. The air outside hit me like a slap, cold and bracing. I stood next to my car for a full minute, the sky low and gray above me, gravel crunching beneath my boots. My coat felt heavy with the recording in my pocket. Proof. No more speculation, no more theories. Lucas hadn't just lied, he had buried a living witness. And now I knew exactly what he was capable of. The next few days moved like chess pieces on a slow, cold board. I filed everything away: the audio of Emily's confession, the visitation logs, the guardianship papers, the record of Lucas's financial transfers to Bellevue. Each item labeled, encrypted, mirrored on 3 drives, and 1 offline copy locked inside my gym locker at an Equinox I didn't even use. I wasn't leaving any part of this to chance. Then the petition arrived. Delivered not by mail but by a man in a gray suit who rang the bell at 6:42 a.m. and asked for Mrs. Evelyn Moore, with a smirk like he knew exactly what kind of mess he was dropping at my doorstep. I signed for it, thanked him, and closed the door without breaking my expression. Inside, a full petition for divorce. Filed through Denver County Court. Irreconcilable differences cited in clean legalese. Lucas wanted 50% of our assets down to the fine art and vintage wine. He requested primary ownership of the Cherry Creek house and exclusive rights to the Tesla. No mention of emotional distress. No hint of apology. Just an inventory. Lucas was burning the house down before I had a chance to strike the match. I scanned the packet and sent it directly to Shannon with one line: we knew this was coming. Lucas called around noon. His voice had that practiced concern smoothed out by years of depositions and backroom deals. I assume you've received the documents. I have. I didn't want to blindside you, Evelyn, but I think we can agree this is for the best. The best for whom? He chuckled softly. No need to turn this into a war. Let's make this clean. Fair split. No courtroom drama. You walk away with your assets, I walk away with mine. No one gets hurt. No one except the people who already have, I said, and hung up before he could twist the knife. 2 days later, we sat across from each other in a boutique legal office downtown. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Abstract sculptures that cost more than most people's rent. Lucas wore a tailored navy suit, no tie, casual enough to feign goodwill. He brought a junior partner from his firm, barely old enough to remember VHS tapes. I wore black. A neutral color. Not mourning, not surrender. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to the folder laid neatly on the glass table between us. "Everything's outlined. Property distribution, timelines. It's generous, really." I opened it. I didn't react. His lawyer started walking through the sections outlining clauses like I didn't already know how this worked. Lucas leaned forward slightly. "If you sign by end of week, we can file uncontested. We avoid court, press, depositions. Everyone wins. And if I don't," I asked, my tone even. His eyes didn't blink. "Then I begin discovery. Full audit of your firm's books. Asset tracing. We subpoena your communications, Evelyn. I know where to look. And I know what I'll find." I stared at him, not smiling. "You're bluffing." "I don't bluff," he said calmly. "I document." I closed the folder. "You know, Lucas, the difference between us is you think leverage is the same as truth." He tilted his head. "And what do you think it is? Exposure?" There was a flicker in his eyes. A beat of silence before he regained his mask. I stood adjusting the sleeve of my coat. "You can file whatever you like," I said. "But from this moment forward, we don't speak again without lawyers. And if you threaten me one more time, I'll consider it retaliation under state code." As I turned to leave, his voice dropped. "You push this and you'll end up exactly where she did." I paused but didn't look back. The fire had started. And he just handed me the match. I walked straight to a corner cafe, sat with a bitter coffee untouched in front of me, and opened my laptop. My secure account was still open. Marissa had replied, "Received. Review underway. Stand by." I drafted a new message, cold and short, subject immediate release, body initiate. Full review. Audio confirmed. Files attached. Attachment EM, recording, full. Wave Bellevue, billing. Log. PDF, guardianship scan, Emily M. TIFF. I encrypted and sent the message using a one-time token. Then I locked my laptop and stared out at the street for a long time. Lucas thought this was about property. But I had already buried that version of myself. The one who played house, the one who wore smiles like armor. He was going to learn what it felt like when someone stripped your name of safety and built something stronger in its place. A name that didn't flinch when darkness spoke, a name that knew the cost of silence. And this time, he wouldn't be the only one writing the ending. I had always wondered what it would feel like to vanish. To walk away not in fear but with purpose. There was no thrill. Just silence. And precision. On a Friday morning while the city still slept beneath a sheet of late winter fog, I left. No note, no trace. I wore jeans, a gray sweatshirt, and a baseball cap pulled low. The car was parked 3 blocks away, packed 2 days before. My phone, the real one, was left behind on the kitchen counter next to a cup of coffee still warm. I locked the door from the outside and dropped the key into a storm drain. The burner phone buzzed once as I drove toward the airstrip west of Parker. I didn't check the message. It wasn't from anyone I wanted to hear from. By the time Lucas opened his email that morning and realized the Sterling account no longer recognized his credentials, I was already in the air. The trust had executed overnight. Shannon triggered the protocol as planned. All assets moved to a secured offshore account under the name of an independent holding entity. No direct ties, no legal leverage. Lucas tried calling, then texting. By 10 a.m., he had emailed, "We need to talk. Urgent." An hour later, "Where are you?" I imagined him in his office pacing, clicking refresh on the banking dashboard, watching zeros where once there were 6 figures. The control slipping from his fingers like sand through glass. But that was just the beginning. At 1:42 p.m., 2 unmarked SUVs pulled into the underground parking garage of Callahan and Reed. The agents from the DOJ and the FBI arrived simultaneously. Their timing was coordinated down to the minute. Agent Marissa Deakins led the charge. They didn't knock. They walked through the front doors with warrants in hand, went straight past reception and into Lucas's corner office. He was mid-conference call. They shut it down in 30 seconds. Marissa laid the folder on his desk. Lucas Moore, we are serving you with a federal warrant for the investigation of fraudulent guardianship, unlawful financial manipulation, and conspiracy to commit civil rights violations. He blinked. This is a misunderstanding, he said, standing slowly. It rarely is, she replied. They confiscated his laptop office computer and 2 external drives from the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet. Brett, his junior associate, stood by speechless. Someone in the hallway started filming on their phone. At the same time, another team of agents executed the second half of the operation, a sweep of Bellevue Secure Ward. Dr. Marla Hale was escorted out of her office mid-session. Her access badge deactivated. Her medical license suspended pending investigation. The hospital director, blindsided, issued a public statement within the hour claiming full cooperation and 0 prior knowledge. That night, the news broke. Local prominent Denver attorney under investigation in shocking mental health custody scheme. National wife's disappearance triggers federal probe into high-profile legal figure. They didn't name me, yet. But they would. Lucas spent the evening making calls, his attorney, his partners, his brother in Chicago. Each call more desperate. He paced his kitchen, poured himself bourbon, then forgot to drink it. He tried accessing the tracking app he'd secretly installed on my phone months ago, only to find the device offline and reset. By midnight, he sat in the dark, staring at the blank message thread. At 12:03 a.m. He typed, "Where are you, please?" At 12:07 a.m., he sent, "You don't understand what you've done." At 12:21 a.m., he tried calling again. Straight to voicemail. I watched the screen of the burner phone light up once, then dim. I didn't answer. I didn't save the number. I powered it off and placed it inside a metal container, then slid it into the motel room's mini fridge under 3 cans of Coke. I was 3 states away by then. A name that didn't exist in public records. My hair dyed darker. My voice changed just enough to slide past suspicion. I wasn't running. I had moved. Vanishing wasn't about distance, it was about erasure. Lucas had erased Emily with court papers and locked doors. I had erased myself with strategy and silence. That's the part he never understood. When women disappear by choice, they're no longer in danger. They're preparing. By the time the DOJ subpoenaed his firm's internal emails, I had already secured the statement from Emily verified by Marissa. Copies of the hospital's medical logs showing no legitimate grounds for Emily's confinement. A trail of banking irregularities and unexplained guardianship filings, all with Lucas's signature. He hadn't just broken the law, he'd documented it. And now every file, every form, every word would speak louder than he ever could. There was no final confrontation. No last words. Just the clean surgical removal of power. Lucas had always thought the story ended when someone vanished, but I had learned the truth: disappearance isn't an ending, it's a door. And I had already stepped through. The motel's curtains fluttered in the morning breeze, carrying with it the distant chime of church bells and the scent of roasted chilies from a nearby vendor. I sat on the edge of the bed barefoot, the burner phone already glowing in my hand. The message had come through at 6:58 a.m. From Julia, no emojis, no exclamation marks. Just a single link and one sentence. It's over. Watch. The video loaded slow, then clear. Denver early morning haze rolling off the pavement. Leighton and Partners loomed in the background, its mirrored facade catching the sun like a blade. Lucas walked into frame, purposeful, confident. He always looked like that at the beginning of things. Then the agents appeared. 3 of them. Civil, composed, deadly. They surrounded him with the ease of choreography. One spoke, holding up a warrant. Lucas didn't flinch. He tilted his head, his mouth moved, probably something like, "There must be some mistake." Then his phone was taken from his hand. His briefcase slipped from his fingers and landed beside his polished shoes with a soft thud. He turned slowly, methodically, the cuff snapping into place behind him like punctuation. Across the street, someone shouted a question. "Mr. Moore, is it true your wife is alive?" He didn't answer. Didn't look for the voice. He looked up. Right at the camera. And then they walked him to the SUV just like that. By 7:30 a.m., The clip had already been broadcast nationally. By 8:00 a.m., it was viral. Headlines spun out like smoke: Denver legal powerhouse falls in guardianship scandal. Lucas Moore linked to decade-long psychiatric fraud. Missing woman Emily Moore found alive after years in seclusion. The media storm hit harder than I expected. Emily's name was everywhere now, her face resurrected from old driver's licenses and grainy family photos. It was like watching someone come back from the dead pixel by pixel. I sat still and let the coverage wash over me. Not because I was shocked. Because I needed to feel it land. By 9:15 a.m., Lucas was sitting in a gray holding room under the Denver County Courthouse, stripped of his jacket and dignity. His tie removed. His hair slightly askew. His expression blank. The state-appointed attorney, a kid who looked barely old enough to order a beer, sat across from him, nervously flipping through a thin folder. Lucas didn't speak. He stared at the wall behind the attorney like if he focused hard enough, it might crack open and offer an escape. But there were no exits now. At 10:47 a.m., Julia sent another message. 3 firms have dropped him. No one wants the fallout. Even Brett cut ties. I thought of Brett's polished shoes and brittle ambition. How many times had I seen him carry Lucas's briefcase like it was a sacred relic? That devotion crumbled fast under federal pressure. Bellevue responded next. A formal statement from their board: Dr. Marla Hale has been suspended pending full investigation. The institution is cooperating with all federal inquiries. Cooperating. A word people used when they were already afraid. At 11:36 a.m., a still from Lucas's intake processing leaked online. It wasn't a mugshot, not officially, but the effect was the same. He sat on a steel bench, eyes cast downward, hands resting in his lap like someone trying to remember how to pray. I printed it on the dusty motel printer. It curled slightly at the edges as it came out, but I didn't smooth it. I just looked at it. Lucas Moore, my husband. The man who once promised me the world, then tried to write me out of it. Now reduced to pixels and paper. By afternoon, the Department of Justice released a redacted summary of the case. It named 3 co-conspirators, all masked by initials, but anyone with a brain could decode it. LM. Attorney Primary Guardian Financial Controller. MH Licensed Psychiatrist Secondary Facilitator. EM Subject. Wrongfully institutionalized. Alive. Anonymous source verified. That last line sat like stone in my throat. Not Evelyn, not the widow, not the victim. The source. Outside, the desert heat climbed. I stepped into the sun just as a passing car slowed to read the newspaper stand. Front page: the walls fall. Moore under federal custody. A woman at the register said to the clerk. He always gave me the creeps. Those perfect men always have rot underneath. I didn't flinch, didn't smile. I just bought a bottle of water and walked the 2 blocks back to the motel, the sand crunching beneath my soles. That night, I watched the city lights flicker from the window, each one a story continuing. Lucas's story wasn't over yet, not legally. There would be arraignments, testimony, years of proceedings. But the myth of him, that was gone. And in its place, the truth. Finally, the motel room felt hollow without persuasion. No longer a temporary refuge, it was an unmarked tomb built from routine, questioned only by the wind brushing the cracked blinds. After weeks under an alias and 3 burned burner phones, I had slipped entirely off the map. My legal identity, my history in Denver, all erased in favor of a reshaped existence. I paid in cash for everything: rent, groceries, bus passes, coffee. I used an anonymous P.O. box for letters from Julia. I hadn't logged into any personal email since I left, and I registered under a fake driver's license at the nearest supermarket. That afternoon, I retrieved the mail. A few advertisements, nothing expected. Then a cream-colored envelope, unregistered, no stamp, no return address. I held it for an extra beat before tearing it open. Inside was a plain folded card. 6 words written in familiar script: I'm still alive. Because of you. No signature. No explanation. But I knew who it was from. My knee went soft. I leaned against the counter, the envelope in one hand, the card in the other. My heart slowed. Not relief. Validation. I folded the card and placed it inside the back cover of the notebook where I had written names and dates the night I dug through Lucas's files. Not for safekeeping. For memory. Outside the window, the street felt empty, but dust swirled in low currents, carrying a distant honk and the faint clink of gas station glass. I poured water into a chipped mug, sat at the small table near the kitchenette, and stared at the card. I didn't reread it, just held the envelope closed. 3 hours later, I went out to buy groceries. I wore sweatpants and a hoodie from Goodwill. No social apps, no social postings. I had broken the tether to everyone I once was. At home, I wiped vegetables and lined the apple beside cartons of eggs. I kept to simple patterns now. I preferred routine. It hinted at control that blood and fear once ruled. That evening, as the desert sun turned the stucco building to warm ochre, the world outside grew quiet. I washed the dishes, dried them by hand, and looked out the window. There was a man below, standing alone under the streetlight in the middle of the block. He held a cigarette. Exhaled smoke, looked up. He didn't move, just watched. My chest tightened, not fear exactly. Something else. Recognition. Then habit took over. I didn't reach for the phone. I didn't panic. I hit a button on the dimmer and let the overhead lamp stay on, left half the curtain closed. Stayed still. My plan had never included going off-grid. But I'd built it so others would only catch glimpses. He could be a detective, Lucas's remaining circle, or a random criminal curiosity. Doesn't matter, I didn't move. I observed. He lingered 15 minutes, then turned, raised the cigarette tip once more, and disappeared down the sidewalk. My breath returned. I locked the window. Changed into the sweats I slept in. Slipped beneath sheets calibrated to darkness. My back rested against a memory I had rewritten. My teeth felt heavy with exhaustion and something else, closure. Not public vindication, just the quiet knowledge that the story had changed. I thought of Emily. Where she was, if she was still living beyond Lucas's influence. The card had no room for fear. I'm still alive. Because of you. That was a declaration and an accusation and a thank you wrapped in silence. Her silence had ended in that form. The next morning, I sat by the window with breakfast. Outside, the street was deserted. No one lingered under the lamppost. But I kept checking because habits formed in darkness but lingered in daylight. I pulled the card from the notebook and sat it on the table. I read it again. Then closed the notebook and left it there. At noon, I folded the bedding, wiped the counters, and left the rental for the day. I wore sunglasses and a wide-brim hat and walked 3 blocks to a dry cleaner. Paid in cash. Switched shirts and hoodie. Went to the library and used public Wi-Fi for 30 minutes. Downloaded news about Lucas's indictment, the DOJ affidavit, Bellevue's suspension order. Didn't read comments. Didn't share a word. By mid-afternoon, I stood by the streetlight's base where I had hidden the next burner phone inside a taped-up container disguised as a soda can. I picked it up, turned it on, waited. A single message from Julia. Emily contacted intake. She's safe. She's coming soon. I photo-scanned the museum-style card. I'm still alive. Because of you. Saved it under secure storage on that phone. Then powered it off, placed it under the fridge magnet strip where no one would think to look. That evening, I stood by the same window as clouds rolled in. The street lamp stayed on. I watched the block. Heard nothing, saw nothing. But my breath stayed even. I didn't feel safe in the old way, knowing Lucas's denial, charlatan's resourcefulness. Enough anger could still linger in someone's mind. But I was free. When I finally turned the light off, I didn't worry about the man outside. Maybe he'd gone, or returned. I didn't care anymore. Because silence wasn't the absence of light. Not anymore. Silence was space. And I had made it mine. The pale glow of early morning touched the horizon as I stepped onto the Greyhound bound west. I carried a single suitcase, fewer than 5 shirts, and no ties to my past. Santa Fe's adobe rooftops shrank behind me, swallowed by distance and dust. I chose a window seat and settled in, breathing out the collected weight of months spent under fear's shadow. From that peephole, the world unfurled slower than I imagined, scrubland mesquite mile markers ticking like verdicts. No traffic cameras. No familiar storefronts. Just the hush of motor hum punctuated by the rustle of the landscape shifting mesa into sage, sage into rocky desert. My phone stayed silent. No pings, no alerts, just absence. I let it be. When the bus paused at Gallup 14 hours into the journey, I stepped off, stretched, and bought water and almonds with exact change. A family laughed nearby. A couple argued softly in Spanish. Kids raced across the parking lot. They didn't notice. I didn't want to be noticed. I didn't belong anymore, not to them, not to anyone who once thought she fit tidy boxes. Back on board, the earlier silence resumed. The man in front tapped a foot to a rhythm I couldn't place. The sun rolled past plate glass window, and I closed my eyes, feeling the motion calm the tremor in my chest. Lucas had once lectured about trajectory and control. He thought life was formulaic. Now I understood the lie. Life wasn't about plotting endings, it was about enduring. Quietly. We crossed into Arizona and passed signs announcing Flagstaff, then Palm Springs, then a million small towns with names I'd never visit. Twilight came. The mountains became silhouettes. A low moon glowed above one ridge, pale as forgiveness. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass and recalled Emily's 6-word voice echoing in my mind. I'm still alive. Because of you. It felt like more than statement. It was prophecy. Night deepened and desert wind pressed against the window. Within the bus, lights dimmed but stayed warm, not harsh. I tucked my arms inside my sweater, curled forward, and let memories drift through the hum of the road. Somewhere in Nevada, a stop came. I stepped onto cracked pavement, tanked water, then walked to a bench and sat until I could feel my bones uncoil. A paper cup of coffee warmed my fingers. I looked up at a neon motel sign that flickered orange and teal, offering a forgotten name. I didn't stop. I didn't want the moment named. Back inside the bus, darkness felt like permission. I closed my eyes, and through the blur I whispered to myself, I didn't come here to fade away. I came here to breathe. Fully, on my own terms. I didn't want to win. I wanted to live. Entirely. We climbed Tonto Pass under Moonlight Road, twisting between cliffs and pines. The air cooled and my breath formed soft islands. I thought of the legal documents sliding apart into redacted chaos, of Lucas surrounded by federal agents in cuffed silence, of Bellevue's corridors emptied. That tower had collapsed publicly, but now I realized collapse was silent, underground roots pulling apart, not done with a roar. Done with quiet erosion. By dawn, the bus coasted along the Californian plain. Golden haze painted the dust in soft ochre. I watched through the glass as irrigation wheels sliced circles into fields of green. It struck me then I still belonged to something real. Something green, something still growing. A steer truck rumbled past. Wind picked up dust at the shoulder. I inhaled it, asphyxiated in memory and inhaled in possibility. I didn't know where I'd arrive. Not truly. But I felt tethered to a new timeline, one I authored. Evening came and the lights flickered on inside the cabin. A daughter leaned on her mother's shoulder. A man dozed beside me. I sat upright, jaw resting gently against my palm, not tired but present. I recognized in their faces what hadn't belonged before: ordinary life. Quiet witness to survival. Unaware, unseeing of my descent, not under structures but beneath facades. As we passed through Bakersfield, the bus slowed. I stayed curled forward until it stopped. I disembarked, suitcase in hand, the horizon now lit golden. I walked beneath a single lamp and paused before a newsstand displaying morning headlines, pictures of Lucas's intake booking next to old missing posters of Emily. I didn't linger, not anymore. I tucked the paper into my bag, less a trophy, more a marker. An archive of what unspooling silence could achieve. That night, I entered a small motel. I checked in under a new alias. Paid cash. The owner offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I handed her a card and whispered no. I needed nothing but the key. In the room, I lit a lamp at dim. I placed the news clipping on the nightstand beside a bottle of water. The air smelled of recycled heat. Outside, cicadas hummed in dry excitement. I sat on the bed, suitcase at my side, sheet soft beneath me. I exhaled relief. Not triumph. Release. I thought of Emily still alive in some facility or halfway house, maybe sleeping under blankets that smelled clean. I hoped she had days where sunlight felt free and not suffocating. The card had said I'm still alive. Because of you. That remained my lodestar. Not power, not victory. A flicker of connection. A fragment of survival passed on. I slipped beneath blankets and kept lights low. Outside footsteps echoed on gravel. I didn't flinch, I didn't rise. I just stayed rooted in my new truth, breathing deliberately, holding everything in place with quiet force. I fell asleep with that. Not safe, not hidden, but free. A lingering moment holds Evelyn's calm face reflected in the darkened window, desert silhouettes blurred behind her. Her eyes closed slowly, then cut to black screen. Justice isn't always loud, sometimes it's silent survival. The final voiceover: I never sought victory. Only the right to exist fully and without fear. Sometimes the deepest revenge is simply staying alive.